Good evening, welcome to the show. Steve Price sitting in again for Andrew Bolt this week, and thanks for joining me. And our thoughts right around Australia are still, of course, with the battle for survival and recovery of so many Queenslanders in far north Queensland. I still shake my head at the amount of water that those people are trying to deal with there. I mean, we're talking about in the old 7 foot of rain in 40 hours. I mean, it's just unbelievable. Let's get stuck in. Here's what's coming up tonight on the program. Talking of that rain event, 2 metres in 40 hours, as I said, more in some places. And the military is now in there with heavy equipment, including Chinook helicopters, trying to pluck people off rooftops. They're still there, been there for a couple of days. Port Douglas, that jewel in the crown up there, is cut off. The local mayor will join us to tell us how people are coping. Senator Bridget McKenzie, Nationals leader for Victoria, on what now seems to be the inability of the Albanese government to make a decision regarding this US request for help in the pirate policing in the Red Sea. And plus, I'll talk to her about the latest opinion poll comparing the Prime Minister with the opposition leader, Peter Dutton. Some interesting revelations in the Australian today. And Daily Telegraph crime reporter Mark Morey on how some social media apps are being used by crime gangs to recruit foot soldiers. Plus, Mark will tell us about the horrific New South Wales road toll. Last weekend, 10 people lost their lives, and that's just heartbreaking. And he also has details of a massive cocaine bust, which was actually found by accident. First, though, speaking of crime, it's fair to say Australia is in the middle of a youth crime crisis that our police, our courts and our politicians just don't seem to be able to deal with. Indeed, in many cases, the courts are making this issue worse. At the heart of what's happening seems to be the use of young teenagers by crime gangs largely to commit home invasions, car thefts and carjackings, knowing that the magistrates and state Labor governments are very inclined not to lock up these children, and many of them are children. Now, indeed, most of the Labor states and the crazy Green left government in Canberra are actively looking at raising the age of criminality. Victoria, as an example, by the end of next year, will pass laws that 10 and 11-year-olds will not be held responsible for committing a crime. And 2 years after that, 2027, that age will go up to 14. So a 13-year-old, go your hardest, pinch a car, break into an 80-year-old woman's house, steal what you can, frighten the life out of her, and walk away free as a bird. Now, this is crazy stuff. Mid-next year, 2025, that 14 age bracket will be law in Canberra. These changes upwards of what age you can be reasonably considered to be capable of committing a crime is being driven by groups who claim it unfairly locks away Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander boys and girls. Now, hotspots this year have included, as we know, the horrifying scenes out of Alice Springs that erupted mid-year in the middle of the Voice referendum and the lead up to that referendum that failed so badly for the Yes campaign. Now, Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price was on this program last night, and she said that crime wave in Alice continues to this very day. If you go north in Queensland, Townsville's a community ripped apart by the level of youth crime. And we've showed here time and time again vision of teenage and younger kids leaping over fences, ramming stolen cars and breaking into houses. It's out of control. Sydney and Melbourne are huge cities, but there are pockets, especially in Melbourne, where teenage crime gangs, children really, prowl the streets at night, a law unto themselves. I mean, the poor old coppers, they arrest these dangerous gang members, they charge those they can take to court, and they then get let back on the streets by magistrates who are too afraid to upset the vocal human rights groups who argue, oh, well, a troubled upbringing in a dysfunctional house, that's an excuse not to lock them up, which is ridiculous. Now, if you'd like an example, I'll give you one. The Herald Sun today. Now, this example is even worse. This boy is now 16, this criminal. He was 15 when committing the crimes. He stole cars valued at $1 million in a 4-week crime spree. 4 weeks, $1 million. He did 18 aggravated burglaries. He was charged with 48 offences in that month and was continually freed by the courts. Another example for you, a 13-year-old charged with 8 burglaries and 4 car thefts in 4 weeks. 13 years old. And even a 12-year-old accused of 6 robberies and an assault. 12. Now, police in Melbourne, in a special operation called Trinity, have made 2,231 arrests in just 9 months. Over 500 of those arrests for burglaries and car stealing. Over 1,700 arrests for drug offences. But the sting in the tail here, aside from soft magistrates, who do you think senior police in Victoria are blaming? This is no joke. Commander Teresa Fitzgerald said these baby-faced criminals were preying on unlocked houses. Seriously, it's your fault. Don't have a window open on a summer's night because your senior police believe you are inviting children prowling the streets to break in. Perhaps police might instead get out of their police stations and patrol the streets in patrol cars where this crime's happening and pick up these out-of-control children. Well, the only problem with that, Victorian police have a numbers problem. Stations are being shut down at night because of lack of officers, and they are in the middle of a pay dispute refusing to do overtime. In the meantime, bolt your doors, shutter your windows and pay some career 12-year-old housebreaker walks past your place tonight. Welcome back now to News Poll in The Australian today, where they have picked apart some interesting figures comparing Anthony Albanese and Peter Dutton. Now, I should make the point that when you start to mine right down into this data, I mean, the numbers become very small. So the data also suggests voters see the opposition leader as a stronger and more decisive leader who understands the major issues facing Australians. That's Peter Dutton. But it's not all good news for the opposition leader. The pollsters also found that the Prime Minister was seen to be, by the people who responded, more caring and likeable, and labelled the Liberal leader more arrogant. Let's bring in National Senate leader Bridget McKenzie to help us break down the day's news and look at those figures. Just before we get into that, great to see you again. The softness of the courts and magistrates and the inability of police to control suburbs at night where 13-year-olds are breaking into houses. Do we have a law and order problem in this country?
Oh, it doesn't matter. I think you ran through the rap sheet quite well in your opening remarks, Steve. From Alice Springs to Townsville, right throughout this country, there is a sense of lawlessness in our regional capitals and suburban streets. And I think it is issues more culturally wider than just police officers being able to utilise the full force of the law and to be on the ground in those areas. We know that a lot of police forces across different states have been wound back under Labor, and they've had their scope of practice, shall we say, really curtailed. But it's also community leaders, parents, teachers and the like that all need to make sure that young people understand that in a civil society like ours, there are expected behavioural norms, and that it's up to all of us to make sure that young people are raised in a way that they don't turn to drug and alcohol in a way that they are, and see the violence that's occurring on our streets.
I'm pretty sure when you and I were 12 and 13, which in my case was a very long time ago, my mother and father would know where I was and I wouldn't be out roaming the streets.
Well, we roamed the streets, Steve, but only during daylight hours. We were home for dinner. And I think that there's been huge cultural shifts, and I do think that our police forces need to be better equipped to deal with what we're seeing as a huge surge in youth crime.
Let's drill down into that news poll. I think you'd accept my point, wouldn't you, Senator, that when you start to distill down to questions like who's more arrogant, the numbers are pretty small to make a definitive assessment of whether that's in fact right or not.
Well, I think with all polling, you've got to use appropriate methodologies to understand the data. But I think what Newspoll was getting to in the analysis today was that you have, before the Australian public at the next election, two very different men. One who is decisive, who seeks to act when required, who is also compassionate. That didn't come through the data, in Peter Dutton, who's very experienced. And you have Anthony Albanese, who's likeable, likes to spin the discs. Maybe Australians would like to have a beer with him. But is he the man, and are they the characteristics that our country needs at this time? And when you look at the geopolitical risks currently, not just in our own region, but across the globe, when you look at the economic issues our country is facing, Australians are rightfully asking, I think, and Newspoll reflects this, which man is better suited to these times? And I think that's going to be the question they'll be asking heading to the polls in 18 months' time.
Yeah, I don't want a nice man or woman as Prime Minister. I want a leader.
Correct. It's not a beauty pageant, mate, is it? So you want somebody that is going to take decisive action where required, and you want somebody that has a compassionate heart. Now, I've worked in the leadership group with Peter Dutton since 2017, and he's an incredibly compassionate man, a side of himself that not a lot of Australians get to see because of the type of roles he's had to have when we're in government. But you will find no greater threat to pedophiles than Peter Dutton. He's an incredibly compassionate man, but he's also a man of action. And I think that's where the real differential with the current Prime Minister is. You've got a very weak leadership style in Anthony Albanese. He and his ministers run away from making the tough decisions at every juncture. And I think Australians are rightfully waking up to that.
One of the tough decisions they've run away from or decided not to take involves this convicted terrorist Abdul Nasir Benbrika. Now, this is the bloke who plotted to bomb the MCG. He was going to blow up the Lucas Heights nuclear reactor, for goodness sake. He's out of jail tonight and he's living in Melbourne. Incredibly, a court in Melbourne today said that he would only be under a security watch for 12 months, which is staggering to me. Now, your government, when you were in government, he was trying to get out then, and you actually took legal action to have him locked away for another 3 years. Why couldn't the Albanese government have done the same thing?
Oh, mate, that's a really good question. I mean, this is the third such instance for the Attorney General asleep at the wheel. He didn't get the application for a continuing detention order in for Benbrika, who is now going to be wandering the suburbs. This is a guy who has been convicted as planning to kill Australians on Australian soil. Let's not muck around here. He's not just, he's not shouting hate speech in the main street. He actually had a plan to blow and kill Australians up. The Attorney General had another case where he had delayed to get oversight orders from another convicted terrorist, that only applying 3 days before this guy was about to be released. And then you've got the case where he was slammed by a judge last week because he didn't get it in at all. And so another convicted terrorist without appropriate supervision orders is on the streets. I mean, Australians heading to Christmas have every right to ask, are these guys up to it? Every single time they are required to make a tough decision when it comes to detainees, when it comes to convicted terrorists, they fail at the first hurdle, and it is Australian safety that's at risk, and it's not good enough, Price. It's not at all, and they've got to get their act together over summer because Australians have to be safe. That's your one job. That's your core basic competency as a government, and they're failing.
Well, talking about lack of leadership, have a listen to Prime Minister Anthony Albanese today, Senator. This was his reasoning behind how Benbrika got out.
It's not a matter of my view, it's a matter of the law, and we have put in place the strongest possible recommendations to ensure community safety, and it is a good thing that the courts have determined to do that.
Gee, it'd be refreshing if
why?
PM stood up and said, look, we made a mistake. We shouldn't let this bloke out. We're going to try and work out how to put him back in.
Correct. We didn't get the paperwork in on time. I mean, these are kind of basic things that Attorney Generals and the Home Affairs Minister and the Immigration Minister need to be across. And it really does beg a belief. And for the Prime Minister to give that wishy-washy excuse on why a convicted terrorist is on the suburb streets right now beggars belief. The fact that his own Attorney General didn't get the paperwork in speaks volume, and I hope he gets a huge dressing down, and this will be the last time, because as I said earlier, it's one of 3 cases in recent weeks.
Yeah, you wouldn't want to be living in the street of that bloke. Just finally, this whole issue with providing a naval vessel to the US to help patrol the Red Sea with pirates, we don't seem to be able to make a decision on that either. I saw the Assistant Defence Minister this afternoon going, oh, well, we're still trying to work it out. I mean, you either have the vessel or you don't, and if you don't, give the reason why you don't have it and why you need to keep the ship here. I mean, don't prevaricate all the time. Do something.
Yeah, absolutely, Pricey. Like, be upfront with the Australian people. If you're going to send our troops into a war zone, tell us how you're going to try and keep them safe and what their mission is, because Australians need to own that as well, right? I'm quite dismayed and disturbed about the government's response to this issue. Australia's Defence Force is known around the world for having its allies' backs, and one of our great characteristics in the defence space is that when one of our mates is in trouble, Australia goes in to assist, and particularly when it is a mate that is as important as one of our AUKUS allies, the excuses are absolutely beyond the pale. Has the Prime Minister called a National Security Committee? That would be the first thing a government should do when a request such as this has come forward. And then you can hear from the Chief of the ADF, you can hear from our security agencies, senior officials that are very experienced in these sort of asks. Sit around the table with your senior defence ministers and others and make a decision as a government. That's actually the process that he should have gone through. And yet it seems everybody is busy doing something else, and days later, our own allies have no idea if we're actually going to come and assist them in the Red Sea when they've asked for it.
Yeah, too busy off in WA sampling $500 bottles of wine. Bridget McKenzie, good to catch up. Thank you very much for your time. Coming up, the ADF rushed to save North Queensland residents. Still some people reportedly trapped on roofs, others losing their homes to those floodwaters. Residents in Port Douglas in particular caught out. Port Douglas is completely surrounded by floodwaters. The Mayor of Port Douglas will be with us after the break. Welcome back. I'll turn my attention to the debt crippling Victoria shortly, talk to the Shadow Treasurer. But I want to go back to North Queensland, those floods in the wake of Tropical Cyclone Jasper. Now, there has been urgent rescues taking place right through the day. Floodwaters have started to recede, but one of the best places on the Queensland coast, in my view, Port Douglas, has largely been cut off. Now, residents in parts of far north Queensland, they've been on rooftops for days. The ADF have now deployed Defence Force personnel, 2 heavy lift Chinook helicopters there doing their best as we go to air tonight. It does bring into question something I raised last night with the Mayor of Cairns. The Bureau of Meteorology was forecasting that Cairns faced, quote, possibly heavy rainfalls of 30 to 130 mils. Instead, the city itself of Cairns received more than double that forecast rainfall on Sunday and was drenched by 268 millimetres. Let's cross live to the Mayor of Douglas Shire, Michael Kerr. How are you coping right now?
A lot better than I was yesterday, I can tell you right now. I'm actually back in my council chambers in my office, which is the first time I've been here in about 3 days, so I couldn't get here. And I've just stepped out of a meeting, which is the first meeting that we've had that we've actually got a full room with ADF included, as well as fresh-faced emergency services staff that have got in here today to help us move forward. Because, yeah, the guys we had here had been here for over a week and we were absolutely at breaking point.
Michael, I don't want to make light of this situation at all, but Port Douglas is one of my all-time favourite places, and it's a favourite place of so many people from down south, whether it be Melbourne or Sydney. How long is it going to take you to clean things up? Have you even put your mind to that yet, or are you still dealing with rescue operations?
Well, you'll be happy to know that Port Douglas is the only place in my shire that wasn't affected. We got a bit of wind blowing during the cyclone itself, but these floods have been from Mossman and north of the shire. Port Douglas is sitting there ready to take tourists as soon as we can get them here. Unfortunately, of course, the Captain Cook Highway is blocked and it could be quite a few weeks before that's opened up, but there will be other accesses to get into Port Douglas. And we certainly hope that in a couple of weeks' time, once we get everything ready, tourists will come back to us and enjoy Port Douglas like they always do.
How smashed did the Daintree get, and how bad? We've seen the situation when we had those dreadful floods in northern New South Wales and northern Victoria. One of the things that happens, as you will know, Michael, is your roads get belted really badly. How tough is it going to be to repair those roads?
A massive job, absolutely massive. And again, from Mossman going north, we've got lots of road damage. There's sections where the bitumen's just disappeared. It's in a paddock somewhere buried in mud. We've got massive landslides in the Daintree around Thornton's Range. There's a 120-metre landslide there, plus there's many others, which we've managed to get helicopters in today to have a look at this. We've got SES crews and other crews going in tomorrow to assess it on the ground level, which we've also managed to get food drops and water drops into them as well today. And, hopefully as soon as this water recedes enough in the Daintree River, we can get the ferry back on and we can get equipment across there and start clearing that as quickly as possible and get all that opened as well.
Michael, I reckon the jungle drums would have been beating. Give me an idea of some of the more remarkable rescue stories involving your wonderful population.
Well, I tell you, Wongo is probably one of the most amazing ones. This little township, they are such resourceful people. We didn't have much there for them because we weren't expecting this amount of rain. They jumped into rescue mode themselves with a couple of SES guys that were there. They borrowed people's boats and they were rescuing people in the dark, in the rain, with no power. They just did an amazing job down there. I think there was over 100 of them ended up in the shelter in Wonga that night. It's just an incredible story, what these people have gone through. And, they've been sitting there now for 3 days with no power, no water, no food resources. So to get things through them now finally is, absolutely great for them.
How important has the ADF support been, Michael?
Well, it's going to be really supportive. And as I said, they just arrived today. So the guys are on the ground. We've got a meeting happening right now with them. So from tomorrow, we'll see them on the ground. And, we need the resources. We're only a small community council, and we certainly need to have the bodies on the ground and, these resources from a state and federal level to be able to get to the areas to repair a lot of this damage. And, it's going to take some time to do so.
Just finally, and repeat this for me, give us the advice on people watching us tonight in the southern states about how important it is, if they have had accommodation booked through this period, not to cancel it, but to just change the dates and still come when things are safe to come.
It is so important. Everyone knows we're one of the hardest hit regions in the country over COVID. Tourism was decimated here, it really was. And, we're just starting to rebuild it. We're only just starting to see international tourists come back again and enjoy what Port Douglas has to offer. The last thing we need now is to go into a second economic slum caused by this. So it's really important to us that, people keep their tickets, keep their accommodation and, get up here and enjoy what we've got to offer and, keep the economy going for these businesses that we have in Port Douglas and the Douglas Shire.
Doing great. You're doing a great job, my friend. I'll let you go back to that very important meeting. Michael Kerr there, who runs things up around Port Douglas. Now, I want to turn our attention to the Victorian debt, which is just crippling the state. They released their mid-year budget update confirming that debt has blown out by billions of dollars in just 7 months. Let's bring in Shadow Victorian Treasurer Brad Roswell. Nice to catch up with you again. Treasurer Palace this week defended the economic strategy, insists the money has to be spent to grow the economy. He's kidding himself, isn't he?
Well, Steve, the bloke's got rocks in his head, and that's putting it politely. In the May budget, we had a net debt of $171 billion, and just on Friday we learned that debt has grown by just over $1 billion a month in the months between May and December. That is absolutely crazy stuff, and it can only be achieved by really a Labor government, whether it's under the flavour of Andrews or Allen.
Well, Dan Andrews has walked out the door with his fat pension and he doesn't care anymore. So Jacinda Allen's been given the hospital hand pass. Do you have any confidence that she's got the ability to fix this problem?
Well, I am always a hopeful person, Steve. I'm always trying to be an optimistic person, but the debt's continuing to grow. I mean, we've got more debt in Victoria than New South Wales, Queensland and Tasmania combined. We've got the highest taxes in the nation. We've got the highest property taxes in the nation. We're paying something like $24 million in interest each and every day in Victoria. Now that's akin to, drawing $24 million out of the ATM, shoving it in a trash can and setting it alight. That is the tragedy of this. When they've got tax incomes increasing more than they expected by about $1 billion, and they're taxing more at the same time, when their debt continues to rise, it's an economic basket case here in Victoria. And I have no confidence that the Labor government here in Victoria is going to do anything differently anytime soon.
Well, the new Premier signed onto that suburban rail loop, actually signed a contract. I mean, how she could do that is completely beyond me. So it seems a leopard doesn't change its spots. To commit to that project is economic suicide. That is ridiculous.
Look, perhaps, Steve, but here's the thing that I'd like to point out about that. They signed onto that suburban rail loop contract only days before knowing that their other project, the North East Link, had blown out from $5 billion, which it was initially costed at, to something like $26 billion. And, an international ratings agency, Standard & Poor's today, has really just called them out on it. Again, because of the economic mismanagement of the now Allen Labor government, Victoria's credit rating is put at further risk. Now, for those people watching at home who don't know the first thing about a credit rating, and fair dinkum, I don't blame them at all, but here's the deal. If your credit rating goes down, that means your state's interest rates rise, which means you're paying more interest. And my fear is that as interest rates rise because our credit rating goes down, that means that the Labor government here in Victoria is going to be taxing Victorians more. I mean, Victorians are already feeling the pinch only days before Christmas. This year alone, energy bills increased by 24-25% for households, 26% for businesses. Cost of living's through the roof. People are experiencing that at the grocery store. There are decisions that the Allen Labor government can make now to ease that cost of living pressure, and they're just not. They're continuing to tax more than any other state in the nation. They're continuing to waste more than any other state in the nation, and they're not going to change type today, and that is the greatest tragedy. And Victorians really need to wake up and to understand the impact on them of electing a Labor government.
We've got a rental housing crisis, and this government, of course, in the last budget slapped on more property taxes for people who are investors. And you walk around the streets, suburban streets of Melbourne, and in every street you see for sale, and I think this is a really interesting observation, block after block of one-bedroom, at most two-bedroom apartments. They are small property investors who've said, I've had enough of this. I'm not going to pay these property taxes. I'm going to sell and I'm going to reinvest in another state.
Well, they are indeed doing that, Steve. And look, the tragedy of this is simply that because of the economic circumstance that the Labor government in this state has got us into, it means that people who are at their wits' end, people who really do need support and help, aren't getting it. Because if you're wasting money with one hand, it means you can't support people who need that help with the other, because you just don't have the cash. You just don't have the money. In Victoria today, we're talking about potential cuts to health. Now, we're in the middle of a health crisis here in Victoria. At the same time, they're taxing you to go visit your GP. We're the highest state in the nation to send your kid to a state school, and yet our educational standards in this state are flatlining. We've got a crime crisis on our hands in many parts of the state. Home invasions are back on the agenda, and you've got police numbers at an all-time low, and a lack of police investment with new police not coming online for some time. These are the fundamentals of a state government: service delivery and infrastructure delivery, and on all counts, Labor are simply failing.
Brad, just finally, I mean, they won an election not that long ago, last year. And so we're a long way away from the next one. How bad do you think things are going to be by the time you get another opportunity to take control of the purse strings?
Steve, I reflect upon that quite often, actually, because I'm not just Victoria's shadow treasurer, I'm Victoria's alternative treasurer as a member of Victoria's alternative government. I've put my hand up to try and fix the mess that Labor have created. That's my obligation to do that, because we've got to do things better. And I'm already thinking about ways that we can do that better. Earlier this year, we instigated a tax discussion paper, which has received, 1,000 plus submissions from people right around the state, all impacted by Labor's taxes and all wanting to see our state grow. We've got to cut waste, more than $38 billion of waste on major projects in the last 9 years under the Labor administration. We've got to grow the economic pie. We've got to roll out the red carpet to businesses right around this state and right around this country to return to Victoria, because at the moment, when businesses are impacted by state government taxes here in Victoria, they're making their next big investment decision in another state. And that's bad for our economy here in Victoria. That's bad for Victorian jobs. And it means that we're actually shrinking the economic pie at a time when we need to be creating opportunity for everyone.
You must have a lot of sleepless nights. Brad Roswell, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Now, coming up, Northern Territory's Chief Minister Natasha Fyles has had to resign with a stunning admission of guilt. My panel will get stuck into that and much more up next. Welcome back. Steve Price sitting in for Andrew Bolt. Now, we've had another one of those protests today, one of the pro-Palestinian protests, this time outside Sydney Town Hall. Now, the Prime Minister was there, so security would have been pretty tight, I would think. He was delivering a speech on international affairs at the Lowy Institute. Have a look at what unfolded.
I think we can take credit for the vote that we saw last week. It is a testament to every teacher who has worn their keffiyeh in class.
Albanese, you can't hide, you're supporting genocide. Albanese, put your hands.
Don't know if you could hear it there, but Albanese, you can't hide, you're responsible for genocide. Let's bring our panel tonight straight in. Joining me now is Will Kingston, host of the Australiana podcast by The Spectator Australia, and Hobart City Councillor Louise Elliott. Will, can I start with you? You're based in New York. We are seeing these protests on every couple of days, at least weekly, in major capital cities. Most of them very vocal. Some of the banners and stuff are disgusting. Are you seeing the same sort of thing where you are?
Yes, I am, Steve. And the unspoken truth with these rallies from New York to London to Sydney is that for many of the people there, they're not pro-Palestine rallies. They're anti-Israel rallies. Anti-Semitism runs through the feeling, the sentiment at these events. Unfortunately, for too many of these people, they now look at the world through this crude framework of oppressor v. oppressed, and Israel falls in the oppressor category. Palestine falls in the oppressed category. And despite the fact that Israel is the one shining beacon of Western liberal democracy in an otherwise troubled region, too many of these nutcases seem to think that it's okay to spout out anti-Semitic thought all under the guise of social justice. And it's nonsense, and we need to call it out as nonsense because it's really dangerous and it's wrong. And it's bad for how we talk about this as an issue.
Will, we just saw there a T-shirt daubed with "You've got baby blood on your hands." I mean, as far as I can work out, the reason this has all begun is because Hamas terrorists entered Israel, and included among the people who they killed were babies in their cots, for God's sake.
That's right, Steve. It's extraordinary how short a memory most of the media, most of the pundits looking at this issue have. There is one reason, and one reason alone, that the Middle East has flared up, unfortunately, once again, and that is Hamas. And the double standards, the kind of false moral equivalence between a terrorist organisation and a democratically elected government in Israel is awful, and we need to call it out as awful.
Louise, we've had back home here 11 members of the Christopher Minns government in New South Wales and 3 federal MPs and the former New South Wales Premier and former Foreign Minister Bob Carr. No surprise, he's been a spruiker for Palestine forever. Do you think that the Albanese government needs to do more to talk to their own people about what they're doing here?
Well, I guess it's reflecting what's happening in the community. There's obviously some chaos and diversity in the views amongst Labor. No surprises with the Greens, though. But this whole issue for me, it keeps coming back to the interview I've watched with the son of one of the Hamas co-founders, Mossab Hassan Youssef, who said that this war is killing tens of thousands of people. The next war will kill hundreds of thousands of people, which is why Hamas needs to be eradicated, which is why I do find the letters that they're writing in this regard calling for a ceasefire. Yes, it's a ceasefire and peace. It's what we all want, but no one can live next door to terrorism.
Will, I'm going to show you something here that's going to make you regret that you left Australia and that you're hanging out in New York. I can only describe this North Queensland resident as summing up, this is for you, Will, to make you feel homesick, mate, and to you, Louise. This sums up the quintessential Australian she'll be right attitude as this bloke swims in a flood in his front yard. Have a look.
So we found them. We got them out of the trees, so they're all worried about you.
Yeah, no.
So you're all right?
Yeah, bloody, yeah, so good.
Homesick, Will?
Yeah, I am. But I'll tell you this, Steve, I hadn't seen that footage. It reminds me of an Australia which I fear is going away with the floods, because that is the type of irreverent, anti-authoritarian, she'll be right, mate view, which I think we all noticed during COVID perhaps doesn't reflect the average Australian as much as we thought it did in days gone by. It's having, this is a laugh looking at this sort of stuff, but I think it's worth bringing these videos up every now and again, because I think this is a version of Australia which we once loved, which we still should love, and unfortunately, I think the average Australian isn't quite as she'll be right, mate, as they used to be.
I reckon that's a great point. And Louise, I mean, we should remind our viewers that chap was more concerned about his neighbours. There was 2 blokes that were stuck up a tree all night and had to be rescued by locals. They couldn't get out of the tree because there was crocodiles in the water. I don't know what that bloke thought he was doing. So he was more concerned about others than himself. He said, I'm okay. Yeah, I'm standing waist deep in floodwaters, but don't worry about me.
Exactly. Down to earth, grounded. We need more of that. And like Will said, I think it's something Australians really don't want to lose that. I mean, that's the true Australian spirit there, the all good mate. And I think people are, in some sides of debates, are getting way too precious about things. I mean, we take things seriously when we need to, but we've also always got the stick together, we'll get through this, she'll be right, mate attitude. And that's what makes Australians so special.
Another political leader, Labor political leader, bit the dust today, Natasha Fyles in the Territory. She was speaking in Darwin, explaining how she'd made a bad mistake. Here's what she had to say as she resigned.
It is clear that I have failed to meet the standards that are set for us and the standards that I set for myself, and I'm not going to make any excuses for that. So for this reason, I believe the honourable course of action is to resign as Chief Minister.
Louise, you're in public life. Conflicts of interest come up all the time, particularly when you're on a council. She says she didn't know that she had those shares. That's surely no excuse, is it?
It doesn't seem right, does it? This is the Chief Minister of a mining state with mining shares. And I really wouldn't have thought it would be too hard to do a quick stock take when you need to, look at your tax return or whatever else to see what pies you do have your fingers in and declare it. So I really find this perplexing. I understand there's complexity around it in terms of, shares were mergers and acquisitions and things change and it was a low value, but there really is no excuse. I mean, the Chief Minister of the Northern Territory, like I said, a mining state, and I do know that this was probably the icing on the cake and there's more history here, but talk about a rookie and unavoidable error. It's really quite perplexing, like I said. Credit to her though, she's resigned from the role, but then again admitted that she'll stand for the next election. So I don't know, where does that leave your career then? You intended to stand, but you've already been basically exposed on a conflict of interest front. So it's kind of a political no man's land.
Yeah, it's a very bad look. Now, Will, in the US, Joe Biden's polling continues to go south. I think his approval rating this month dropped to an all-time low of 34%. We had Greg Sheridan writing in the Australian newspaper today, quote, "You'll love this, Joe is too old and Donald Trump is too crazy, but we are likely to be dealing with the second-term presidency of one of the other." Do you agree? I mean, that's probably correct, isn't it?
I agree with the sentiment. I actually think it's unusually inelegantly worded from Greg. Take those two premises in turn. Joe Biden is not too old. Joe Biden is in the advanced stages of cognitive decline. I think we use the word age as a euphemism for dementia because as a society, we're a bit uncomfortable with it. I don't care if he's, 81, 82. I care that he obviously doesn't know what day of the week it is most of the time. If he was functioning cognitively well, it'd be less of an issue. And on the other premise, Donald Trump isn't crazy. Donald Trump is one of the canniest political operators of our lifetime. By calling him crazy, all you do is you galvanise the base and you actually underestimate him, which is what they did in 2016. But that notwithstanding, Greg is right. That will be the election, and one of those two will be the next president of the United States.
Great to catch up with you both, Will Kingston and Louise Elliott. Thank you very much for that. Now, coming up after our break, the Daily Telegraph's crime reporter Mark Murray will join us on how social media apps are being used by some crime gangs to recruit foot soldiers, plus the horrific New South Wales road toll. 10 people lost their lives on New South Wales roads last weekend. Welcome back. Steve Price with you. Chris Kenny coming up. Now, we're just 6 days away from Christmas. That means the roads are going to get very busy. We're starting to see a really disturbing pattern. The road toll around the country, and this includes Victoria, Queensland and New South Wales, are at higher levels than we've seen for a very long time. 10 people died on New South Wales roads alone last weekend. Joining me now is Mark Murray, crime editor for the Daily Telegraph. Mark, the telly today revealed that, I can't believe this statistic, 1 in every 6 roadside drug tests this year in New South Wales resulted in someone being caught, compared to the 230 roadside breath tests it takes on average to detect a drink driver. Given these drug tests are not perfect, you've got to say lots of people are getting behind the wheel on drugs.
This is, I've been watching this trend ever since they've been able to actually test for drugs in drivers, and they're limited. They're not actually able to detect all drugs, which I think you'd find to be even more frightening if we found out if we could test for all the drugs. Now, the fact that people are getting caught a much higher percentage with drugs in their system than alcohol means, well, in one part, we've done our education over the years about drink driving, but now we need to attack this whole new problem of people driving with drugs in their system. Do you suspect, Mark, we need an ad campaign along the lines of, you remember those very brutal ads we ran about drink driving and showing serious accidents? Because clearly and I'm not just confining this to young people, clearly motorists think that, okay, I can't have 5 beers and a red wine, but I can have a snort of cocaine or take an MDMA tablet and I'll be okay to drive. I was just talking to an officer today, and he said they actually conducted a couple of years ago a roadside test near a music festival. He said some of them, they were getting figures of nearly 80% returns of people who actually had MDMA or some other form of drug in their system. And you're right, those ads way back in the 70s and 80s and 90s have now created a generation where people just do not drink and drive. It's very rare from my age, even younger people, it's ingrained. But you're right, they actually do think, oh, well, it's okay. I'm not affected. I'm okay because you don't slur or anything on some of cocaine or some of these other drugs, but it impairs your reactions or it makes you even less likely to not take risks. Young drivers particularly start driving faster. And, we've seen some horrendous accidents on our roads in the last year. And, it's terrifying to think that it's going to continue. And it really will. I mean, the road toll's up nearly 26, 30%. Another problem is while the police are out there with these figures, the amount of roadside testing they're doing has plummeted at the moment because they just don't have the resources in the police to be out there and be a lot more visible like they used to be.
Yeah, it's a great point. Tell me about this Airbnb bust. Apparently, New South Wales Police have seized one of the largest cocaine seizures ever, worth an estimated $1 billion. It's got a bit of a twist to it, this though, hasn't it?
It's got quite a few twists to it. It started off yesterday morning at 6:30 with some 4 guys who maybe they didn't realise how conspicuous they looked with their faces covered as they tried to break into an underground car park in a very nice suburb Sydney ride. It's very, very middle class. So somebody rang the police and said, look, there's some odd behaviour going there. Local police turned up and found that these guys were sitting in the underground car park and they alleged they had what's called a kidnap kit. They had a meat cleaver, they had ties, they had handcuffs, a few other little bits and pieces where they were allegedly going to try and grab one of the people inside this blocker unit and torture him to find out about their drugs. Now, the detectives were called in and through some very good police work, and some of it that we're not allowed to say for legal reasons, they decided to get a search warrant to go into a ground floor of the apartment where there was a young man who said, earlier in the day, he was helping police, he was great. Said, I'm up from Melbourne, I've got this Airbnb. Well, later at 10:30 that night when they went in, he wasn't all that happy when they opened one of the cupboards and allegedly found 722 kilos of cocaine, which has a street value of nearly $1 billion. Now, this Airbnb is basically being used as a safe house for a massive stockpile of cocaine. Now, the police have told me that the owners have no knowledge. They were just, obviously leasing out a business, and they've ended up having their property is now going to be considered, it's going to be evidence in a major trial.
One of the things about that, it just makes you think how much coke's out there.
You've actually just picked what's on the front page of the Daily Telegraph tomorrow. Again, talking to senior police that it's leading these guys who are allegedly going to kidnap the people to find out how much drugs there are. This is a constant theme going on in Sydney. People are being kidnapped. Earlier this year, we had people having bits of their fingers and toes taken off while they were being tortured to find out the status. Now, that's like Mexico. The amount of drugs I've been told by both underworld, senior police and young people who I occasionally mix with, saying that Sydney has the most amount of cocaine they've ever seen in recent years. It's frightening. And
that's horrendous. That's horrendous to think, Mark. I look forward to reading that piece in the Telly tomorrow morning. It's always a pleasure to catch up with you, mate. Thanks a lot. That's Mark Morrie. Chris Kenny's up next.